Windows is the most popular desktop OS. It's used all around the world by people, companies, and even governments. With such a gigantic and varied user base, it's kinda obvious why they were forced to develop a very specific aesthetic, one that looks very minimal and clean, that doesn't grab your attention because it's not meant to stand out. But what if it was? How would Windows look like if it was meant to be as weird and unprofessional and quirky as possible? Let's find out. My design aesthetic of choice for this project will be Neubrutalism. Neubrutalist, and I probably completely failed the pronunciation, is a new trendy design style. It's about using a ton of different contrasting colors all at once, thick borders around everything, and very obvious shadows to represent depth. This is how a basic card looks like in most of the normal aesthetics you're used to seeing every day. Notice how the shadow is very subtle and nothing is really screaming for your attention besides the button. But if we apply some of the Neubrutalist ideas I presented before to this card, here's the result. This style has already been adopted by websites such as Gumroad and Figma, and it's no coincidence, because another of the main ideas behind this style is that it wants to feel replicable. They want people to look at it and just say, I could make this. Kinda fitting considering the targets of the services I just mentioned. They often use many simple shapes such as the default ones you can find on most presentation software, and especially for illustrations, there usually is a lack of consistency. But even for brands that make a heavy use of this style, such as Figma, the real software they want you to use doesn't actually present any of those design choices. I imagine it's because this style, while effective for marketing and branding, probably wouldn't work that well for an actual professional software, let alone an entire OS. Let's do it anyway. So how do we translate this into an operating system? Let's start from the icons. I started with the icons they use in Windows 11. I didn't change the palettes of the icons because people have gotten used to them after all, but I added some more black. For some icons, like the one from Office, the transition has been quite smooth. They have been pretty easy to reimagine, but others, like the Edge icon, I tried a couple of versions. They didn't look good. I just remade it completely from scratch, and I quite like this final result, to be honest. With the icons out of the way, I had to recreate the other elements, specifically the application bar, the start menu, and a couple of apps. The application bar is just the horizontal bar with all the apps. I know, shocking. On the right it also shows the date, the time, and a couple other things, which will remain pretty much identical because they don't have to change. Now the icons. They have four main states: standard, hovered, open, which is when a program is open but the user is not actively interacting with it, and active, which is, take a guess. To convey the state of each icon, Windows 11 just uses bars below the icons to indicate active programs. Those same bars become shorter for open programs, and then they have backgrounds to indicate when you're hovering an icon. It works, it's a perfectly fine solution, but it doesn't really fit this style, does it? In my concept it works like this. When you're hovering an icon, it'll look like it's becoming a bit taller in 3D. When you actually click an icon to launch the program or whatever it is, it'll look like a pressed button, with a shadow to convey this. Only the icon of an active app will look like this, but both open and active icons will have a different, more colorful background. And to indicate when a program has more instances open at the same time, I use dots and lines, which don't really match this aesthetic, I know, but I couldn't think of better solutions. Now, what about the start menu? This one is relatively simple. The starting point was the Windows 11 design. The main difference is that the icons are all inside of squares or rectangles. It'll feel like you never left. When you hover an icon, there's this cool depth effect. The icons are visually separated from the rest of the menu by having a different background, and that's about it basically. What about the apps themselves? I made two. The calculator, which is pretty much like the old version but way more colorful, and Edge. The various buttons that in the current version are simply separated by space, in my concept have clearly defined areas, with actual bezels between the buttons. As for other random details about the concept I wasn't really sure when to talk about, the active window, whatever it is, also has a shadow to make it a bit more obvious. Now, about this background you've been seeing for the whole video. I wanted to make something that would match this style, right? So when I went to Figma and made a blank image, Figma usually shows you this placeholder, and it looked perfect. Obviously, I couldn't just use the Figma placeholder image, and I gotta say, sometimes the simple solutions really are the best ones. I'm pretty sure this whole concept is far from being perfect actually. There probably are many UX problems, but it was mainly done for fun in like 3 days. But if you want to see something that specifically focuses on user experience and how to improve it, check out this other video then. I think you may like it. And that's it, I guess. Ciao!